The session is entitled Islamists Above the Ground and Poised to Lead. Over the past 2 days, we have heard from academics and experts on the seismic events in the MENA region. The keynote address by Mr. Wada Khanfar on Monday evening set the tone for the conference by taking us back to the beginning, 1918, when the Islamic world was forced to relinquish the Caliphate and disseminate it into nation states. Wada described the 100 years of humiliation and repression and called the revolution a correction of the wrongs of 1918. The language used to describe Muslims during that repressive time perverted the essence of Islam and the identity of Muslims. I would like to quote from a just released novel by Yusuf Romano entitled The Sins of Kings, in which a young South African Muslim lawyer struggles against the apartheid regime and concurrently finds parallels in his universal Islamic identity. In describing the perversion of language, the book reads, and I quote, "He felt sure that when she was born, language was, during her infancy and youth, both pure and unblemished. Perhaps it was politics that warped her and robbed her of her innocence. It saddened him to think how words, dehumanizing nouns and vilifying adjectives would so often be used to suffocate the truth, conceal injustice, or promote hatred and murder. Words could be used simply just to denigrate one's opponents, thus evading the need to examine the facts and debate the merits." Unquote. Islamic resistance movements such as Ikhwan Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Islamic Salvation Front were forced underground and only heard of when described as rearing their ugly terrorist heads, instilling fear and visions of chaos and a return to the dark ages of discord and control. The catalytic death of Bouazizi, Allah yarhamhu, sparked the revival and re-emergence of the Islamic identity and kindled the hope of a just and free society. But neo-Orientalists continue to malign the legitimately and democratically elected Islamists, doubting their ability to govern. In this session, Islamists Above the Ground and Poised to Lead, I invite our panelists to elucidate their understandings of the roles of Islamist movements in the context of the uprisings. To begin with, we have Mr. Wada Khanfar speaking on Islamist visions for a new Middle East and North Africa.
The concept of political Islam. First, I would like to spend 1 minute discussing this issue, because sometimes when you speak about political Islam, you have ready-made thoughts and ideas and judgments that people decide always to attach to it. In my opinion, political Islam as a phenomenon is not an accomplished project. It is a project that started from the early last century, especially when Hassan al-Banna decided to start Ikhwan Muslimin. A response to the vacuum created by the collapse of the Khilafah again, because at that stage, the Ummah thought that there is a great vacuum. There is a huge gap that no one was able to claim representation of the political order of the Ummah at that stage, especially after the mandate of the British and the French colonial powers on most of the Arab world and huge part of the Islamic world. That was a start something. They established. Since then, the whole phenomena of political Islam that emerged from that small meeting between Hassan al-Banna and 4 or 5 of his colleagues until today has gone through huge phases. Most of these phases are related to the reality rather than ideology. And that is a very important element in understanding political Islam. Within political Islam, you would have values related to Islam. Social justice, freedom, fighting tyranny, and so on and so forth. This is why the rich culture within the religion itself, Islam, has empowered people with slogans and with thoughts and ideas, but never empowered people in order. That was left the real interaction between activists who carry the message of political Islam and reality. So you will find that from the 30s until today, the phenomena of political Islam, and here I speak mainly about Muslim Brotherhood, have gone. Muslim Brotherhood, of course, spread all over the country, all over the world. I mean, basically, you have almost in every itself, in a way or another, Ikhwan, or a result of Muslim Brotherhood. Since the 30s until today, you find that this school of thought has gone through all forms of political activity. They have been part of forming governments. For those who do not know, for example, in the 40s, Muslim Brotherhood in Syria did send representatives to the parliament in the 40s. And then they were part of the political formation of the life of Egypt, in the opposition and sometimes in a good relationship with the government. They were part of coups, like what happened in Sudan. They had participated as well in alliances with ruling governments, like in 1970 between the Islamists as well, when the Islamic movement under Al-Islah decided to be part of the government long time ago. And what happened in Egypt, in Jordan, when Muslim Brotherhood decided in 1989 to participate in the government with 5 ministers when they were elected to the parliament, and so on. So you will find that this phenomena has been interacting with reality in a practical rather than a political manner. This is why it makes it political Islam has nothing different from any other political phenomena beside the fact that it does claim representation of collective identity, collective mind and heritage and understanding of what the society and the religion is all about. Beside that, Muslim Brotherhood and other political movements that went out of the great movement of Muslim Brotherhood did actually follow the normal standards of pragmatic politics in the case of opposition, or the case of alliances, or the case of fighting against certain kind of regimes and going to jail and going out of jail. They have maintained during that period one important, but in a few exceptions. The first exception was in Syria, when the Ikhwan did actually attack the government, and they had huge confrontation and great loss after that. The confrontation ended with more than 25,000 of them, or Syrian civilians, were killed by the regime of Hafez al-Assad at that time. I argue that this incident, this particular experience, since then, the political Islam movement has taken from that particular incident a great lesson of not engaging itself in violence again. Since then, the whole syndrome of Syria became prominent within the mind of Islamists and leaders in the region. So whenever something is confronting them, and some maybe enthusiastic youth are pushing for more action against the regime, then the leaders will always back off and remind everyone with the disaster and the tragedy that took place between Muslim Brotherhood and the government of Syria. So that was consistent within the political Islam phenomena. At this stage, reaching to the Arab Spring and the current situation, we have two major schools of thought within the Sunni tradition of political Islam, because the Shia tradition of political Islam has different dynamics and different rules because of the Wilayat al-Faqih concept. But within the Sunni tradition of Islam, we have two major schools of thought. The Muslim Brotherhood one, and the offshoot, where you are talking about Al-Nahda Party in Tunisia, or Al-Islah in Yemen, or you are talking about Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, or the went out of Ikhwan. And you have the Salafi trend that, in fact, right now is also going under new transformation. the Salafi thinking, in principle, does not have a lot to speak about in politics. Because most of the time, the Salafi tradition is concerned about the code of conduct and the morality and the personal relationship between, between the human being and the religion, and the way that you implement the religion in your life. Now, when the Salafis in Egypt decided to go under, or some of them, to go under political party and to participate, that was very important development within the Salafi way of thinking about politics. The same has happened in Yemen, when there is a Salafi party as well, beside the Muslim Brotherhood Party, which is Al-Islah, the dominant Islamic party in Yemen at this stage. Also, they are now registering a political group. In Tunisia, you have Al-Asala party that has also been registered officially, and the Salafis have started working within or under that particular party. In Libya, we have more than 3 or 4 Salafi groups who have organized themselves within political formations. Of course, some of us would argue that the way that the Salafis are conducting politics at this stage has nothing to do, again, with what politics could be, or the dynamics and the pragmatic approach of politicians and professional diplomats and professional politicians. But I would argue the other side, that knowing the background of the Salafis and the fact that they have accepted to be part of political formations within regimes that they, according to their theory of understanding or interpreting Islam, are not Islamic. It means they have started to accommodate themselves with reality in a pragmatic manner, and that is very great development. Now, the skills of practicing politics, of course, they have no experience, and they did not graduate from Harvard School of whatever politics, whatever the case, and they have never had the chance to participate in political life, and a lot of them were in jail, like what we see in Libya when the Al-Jama'ah Al-Islamiyya Al-Muqatila, actually most of them were in jail, the leaders, and now they are participating in the current elections or the current political formation. So that tells us that there is a new migration from within the old idea of isolating the Salafi movement from the political structures into a new thought of inserting this concept of politics within the tradition of the Salafis. And in my opinion, this is a very important development, and this will allow us to predict the path of the Salafi thinking, because I would say that the organized Salafis will start behaving similar to what Ikhwan are doing. Because the only tradition that they could find in front of them to draw from and to deal with is the Ikhwan tradition that has preceded them. They have no other tradition, unless if you would bring Taliban model into the Salafi tradition. And I know, and you know, that the Taliban model in general is not classified as Salafi, because movement like Taliban was always offshoot of the Dayubandi school of thought, which is not in the principle a Salafi school of thought. So, and that model of Taliban did not succeed in making itself within the Islamic world, or within especially the Arab world, very lucrative or very accepted, so people could follow it. So I predict that the Salafis eventually will start following the Ikhwan way of thinking about politics, and I would say, also I would predict that the Ikhwan way of thinking about politics will start moving in a direction of accommodating themselves with developments whenever they emerge. Now, I said yesterday that the concept of relationship between the modern state and Islam is debatable now in the Arab world. I have attended during the last 2-3 months a lot of conferences about the relationship between modern Islam and politics. One of these conferences, which I would like to speak about, it is a conference that was held by the Union of Ulama in the Islamic world, led by Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi, attended by the top scholars of Islam in the Muslim world. This conference was held in Tunisia. I was present in that conference. I was invited as well to the conference. I have noticed something new, that the ulama, the scholars of Islam who are supposed to represent some form of legitimacy for all political groups and movements in order to tie them to the Islamic audience, I think they have started making what we call ijtihad. It means they have started transforming their perception about politics from the theoretical one that was inherited from generations or even centuries ago into new modern discourse that suits the new reality. To an extent that I have started feeling that the concept of secularism in form of separation between the state and religion, and I mean by religion here, the religious institutions and the religious discourse, could become acceptable within Islamic movements at this stage, not because Islamists would like to isolate themselves from politics, but Islamists are moving in a direction whereby the only model that they are going to embrace is going to be liberal and democratic in a way or another, but with rich values and commitment to social and public interest. So I'm saying that this notion, when it was discussed, for example, in that particular conference, it was not condemned as usual. People will debate it. Some people are with it, some people are against it. So here you are seeing the traditional conservative ulama moving from their traditional thought of what politics is all about, even the terminology. Because one important problem within our discourse, within our Islamic discourse about politics is the terminology. We speak about imam. The imam, who is the imam? I asked that question in the conference. Do I regard, for example, Monsef al-Marzouk, the president of Tunisia, as an imam? Because the imam in our tradition and culture, he's the khalifa, who has also, plus his duties as a political actor, he has also some kind of status within our discourse of Islam, whereby you refer to him to lead your prayers, you refer to him to define certain kind of criteria for the society. Can I regard the Prime Minister of Turkey as an imam? Can I regard, for example, the President Morsi in Egypt as imam? So this traditional Islamic discourse on politics is outdated at this stage, and everyone realizes that we need a new discourse and theory on describing the current situation. Because this ummah or this Islamic doctrine, we have never ever been confronted by Islamists leading modern states. Islamists and Muslims led Khilafah states, led some kind of formations that are different from this new concept of modern state. And the modern state by nature has its own dynamics and DNA that cannot be Islamized. You have to adapt your discourse to suit the Islamic State and to influence it positively in a direction that might morally and ethically suit your Islam. But you cannot Islamize it in a manner that you subject it to your inherited views about politics you inherited from the Abbasids or the Umayyads or from the 100 or a few thousand years, a few hundred years ago. That does not work. So in this case, what the Turks did in the relationship between Islam and politics, that they have practically kept the values alive in the charismatic leadership of Erdogan, for example, and the discourse of his ministers and his government. But at the same time, when did they behave politically? They behaved like a political group, like any other political group in the country or in the world. They define the interest of the state, and they act based on that, taking into consideration the representation of the masses on the ground and their wish and the direction that they are following, which is the essence of democracy. So if you take Turkey as the 10 years extra to what's happening right in the Arab world, because the phenomena in Turkey started almost 10 years ago as a relationship between the political group and Islamic political group and the state, I would say maybe in next 10 years, most of the Islamists, and even maybe less than that, they will start behaving like responsible political groups, like any other political group, but with injecting values and the traditions within the sector of vision rather than programs and activities. This is the first one. The second, definitely there will be new synergy emerging within the states that have similar or like-minded people. So let us say Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, and maybe in the future Syria and also Libya, they will have to develop some kind of understanding on pragmatic issues. In this case will be, economic integration. In this case will be freedom of travel for people and trafficking goods and so on and so forth. So that also will empower a new trend within the Arab world of creating not unity but integration. And the difference is the concept of unity was introduced to our political discourse by pro-Arab nationalists. The pro-Arab nationalists, especially during Jamal Abdel Nasser, they came up with slogans about what unity should look like. We are one ummah, we are one nation, we should be united under the banner of pro-Arab of nationalism. Now, Islamists do not believe in nationalism in principle, but they do believe that their relationship with each other could pragmatically and from interest-based view help each other. So that was going to be a new form of integration and unity that is not nationalistic by nature, but it might be pragmatic by nature. And also, we may witness the last trend that I foresee for the next few years to come, that the relationship between this area, which is called the Arab world, and Africa, since we are talking about Africa, is going, 2 minutes, is going to evolve. Because in the relationship between us in the Arab world and Africa, between the North Africa in particular and Sub-Saharan Africa, we had a lot of difficulty during the last few years. The most important amongst all of them is Sudan. Sudan is supposed to be a bridge of tolerance between Africans and Arabs, but unfortunately it has become, a trench of troubles and difficulty, not only because of the southern Sudan relationship with the north, but also in Darfur. And you have many other emerging crises in Mali and in Nigeria, and also the previous legacy that we inherited from the wars between the Gaddafi regime and many other, Anyway, so we had that kind of image. In my opinion, during the last 20 years, the Arabs did not have a strategy towards Africa. We did not have any vision on what should be done in Africa. We have been ad hocly dealing with African partners, but without really giving a lot of considerable thought into Africa as a strategic depth towards the Arab world. The economic crisis that we are seeing now in Europe, and the fact that we have new legitimate representatives of their nations, in Egypt in particular, and the fact that Egypt cannot survive without proper understanding of its relationship with the South, the Nile area, Ethiopia, Sudan, and so on and so forth. This will lead us in the Arab world to think of new approach towards Africa, to regard us in the north of Africa as the gates of Africa to the world, rather than regarding ourselves the backyard of Europe. And at this stage, in my opinion, Europe is collapsing, and we have nothing really much to gain out of Europe. So politically, economically, and even culturally, I foresee that the Arab Spring will lead towards much more solid understanding of our strategic depth in Africa and the strategic relationship between the North and the Sub-Saharan Africa. Assalamu alaikum.
I would now like to introduce Mr. Ashur Shamis. You have his biography in front of you, but just a correction on that. He has recently been appointed to the board of directors of a newly formed think tank in Tripoli, the National Policy Decision Support Centre.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the Afro-Middle East Centre of South Africa for organizing this conference and for the opportunity for me to come to South Africa, which I feel like a second home to me. The conference is timely, auspicious occasion for debate and exchange of concerns. For concerned we ought to be. The Muslim world, especially the Arab region, has not seen for a long time anything like the developments and changes we have seen in the last year and a half. In this presentation, I will try to outline a few major changes that impact on the region and its people. Firstly, I will review briefly what happened in Libya. Secondly, where the movement of Islam features in this, and what its advocates are facing on the ground. And thirdly, what pitfalls may lie ahead and the possibilities that seem to be opening for us all, for the whole region as well. Most of those who bear the Islamist banner in the Arab world are new to the corridors of power. Rather like you here in South Africa in 1990, when the Honorable Nelson Mandela was released from jail and the apartheid system was dismantled. It is the first time since the loss of the Khilafah in Ottoman Turkey in 1922 that the Islamists find themselves encumbered with political power, with all its trappings and tribulations. It has been entrusted to them lock, stock, and barrel. Over the last year and a half, Libya has experienced a total sea change, which has shaken the very foundations of its politics and the balance of power. The game has changed, and this time for real. Although the signs and causes of this dramatic political earthquake were there to be seen, at least for the last 60 years or so, nobody expected the intensity with which it was to happen, the forms it would take, nor the effects it was going to have on the people of the region and on the whole world as well. These effects are likely to be felt for many years to come. It has been a most tremendous change in the history of the region. It was a change, a revolution if you like, unplanned, with no modus vivendi and without leaders. From total dictatorships and despotic regimes to supposedly free, democratic and open societies. From false and sham political systems, we are transported to mass elections, pluralism and democratic governments. From February 2011, Libya went from an uprising which engulfed the whole population for 7 months to a period of transition with full participation of its people in free, democratic and liberated society. Before the guns went silent, with weapons out of control and rudimentary state institutions and fighting going on in several parts of the country, Libyans have undertaken a challenging and ambitious task. They got rid of the most vile and murderous regimes. They embarked on building on the ruins of war what they hope is a modern, democratic, fair and free Libya, a tall order. They declared the liberation of the country from the regime forever, established a national council, a national transitional council, a working interim constitution, 2 transitional governments, and a 3rd one underway, a general national congress, and organized a most exceptional elections campaign which were fair and clean. And they have now embarked on drawing up a constitution to the basis of governance to the new state in the matter of 18 months. All of this in the matter of 18 months. No less than a year of declaring the liberation, no less than a year of declaring their liberation, a record time, Libyans have achieved great and momentous strides. The manner in which all of this has happened was beyond anyone's expectations and far from anyone could hardly dare to predict. The elections of July this year themselves were held in total transparency. They were fair and clean. Over 20,000 local and 180 international observers were present. The United Nations, the African Union, the League of Arab States, the European Union, the Carter Center were only some of the international institutions. There were the usual media and the hundreds of individual observers from all over the world. The elections resulted in, out of 200 seats, in 39 seats to the National Council Party, a coalition party, 17 seats to the Construction and Development Party, the Ikhwan Party. In a country of 6.5 million people, there were 2.8 million eligible voters, of whom 1.7, that's 62%, cast their votes. There was a clear and strong presence of women at all stages of the electoral process, with 35 women elected to the Congress. Despite some security issues and the proliferation of weapons all over the country, the campaign went very smoothly, with very few incidents of disruption. According to none other than Ian Martin, the UN representative in Libya, the elections proved to be an outstanding achievement, considering the novelty of the process, the lack of electoral experience, and the short time in which they were completed. After all this, the outcome of all what happened lands in the lap of the Islamists. And Islamists here I use with a small I in brackets. These so-called Islamists, advocates of what came to be known as political Islam, come to where they are today with heavy and mixed baggage. When it comes to politics, other groups, and indeed society as a whole, looks at the Islamists with suspicion and cynicism. They are perceived as condescending, autocratic, opportunistic, or even selfish. The Islamists label in Libya covers a wide spectrum of groups that consider Islam as the religion and as a moral and legal system as their main reference in worldly affairs. These include the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, the jihadist groups such as the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the Salafis, the Sufis, etc. Nevertheless, we must remember that the whole of the Libyan society is Muslim, adheres to the mainstream of Islam, and takes Islam as its way of life. Their identity is Muslim, that is Islamic, not by politics or partisan affiliation, but by fundamental, inalienable birthright. Looking at the various groups, we find that the Muslim Brotherhood, by far the most significant group, suffers from an image problem. They have to resolve the question of who and what is the Ikhwan. Is it a charitable educational body, as envisaged by its founder, Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, in the late 1920s and early 30s? Is it Islamic movement? Is it an Islamic movement aimed at changing society as a whole from its roots? Is it a political party, a civil society organization, an NGO, or a social and cultural establishment? Who draws up the policies and takes the decisions of the movement, the group or the political party? Some Islamic groups have been smeared by the stigma of violence and extremism. They are often associated with the Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups. However, the Islamist groups have some of the most highly qualified, well-respected, and patriotic men and women in Libya today, with the highest integrity and credibility and honor. Yet, rightly or wrongly, they have a public confidence crisis that must be resolved. They need to trust the public. They are perceived as secretive, enigmatic, and elitist, and with foreign or external organizational links. The Islamists are often presumed to have a worrying supranational dimension. Their decisions and policies are usually determined outside Libya, and therefore are not to be fully trusted. The question always is asked, are their interests national or supranational? They are also accused of being isolationist and intolerable of other views. So the question remains, can they be trusted as political leaders? This is a problem for the Islamists because they often presume to represent Islam in its totality. They seem to claim for themselves another more lofty version of Islam. What they say has an invaluability of its own. They need to work on and have political programs offering real tangible solutions to Libya's nagging problems, not simply platitudes or rhetoric. They must offer programs and views and be ready to have them debated, analyzed, and scrutinized, even rejected by others. They need to have leaders, individuals who stand up in society. It is no use crying foul every time things don't go their way, or claiming an anti-Islam conspiracy when they are opposed or criticized. Thus, we find that the onus is on the Islamists to prove to the people that this is untrue or misconceived, and that might take a long time and a lot of work. The successes in attaining power by the Islamists must not be seen as the end of the process, but the beginning. The real test for their will and credibility starts now. These people have been working in the dark for many years. They have been underground, and now they are above ground. Their policies and the methods and ethics of their tactics will have to be and will be examined and critically viewed by their supporters and the detractors alike, with such rigor and ferocity they are not accustomed to. They have to undergo a fundamental transformation from being watched and hunted to being free and open. They have to stop talking to themselves and their own supporters and apologists and start talking to the wider public. Their programs will be torn apart. Their leaders will be laid bare. They have turned from poachers to gamekeepers. They have gone from opposition to custodians of the political system. They have to get used to debate and persuasion, forming coalitions and working with others. They have to stop preaching to the converted. The Islamists have to learn that none of us have a God-given birthright above the rest of society to represent Islam. They have no monopoly on speaking for or defending Islam. That is something they share with the wider Muslim Ummah. In the words of Sheikh Rashid al-Ghannouchi, they have a version, a reading, or interpretation of Islam which the people can accept or modify or reject. The elections in Libya of the General National Council held last July proved to be a real practical and effective test for all political trends, including the Islamists. They showed that the Libyan people, given the freedom of choice and a level playing field, could make a reasonable and enlightened electoral decisions. Above all, they have shown that the public sentiment, support, and support are overwhelmingly on the side of those who advocate a message with Islamic movement. The Islamists have to prove their worth to the people. So let us summarize. The Islamists are no longer victims, but active players in an arena of in an arena of scrutiny. And am I allowed to have a drink? The Islamists are no longer victims, but active players in an arena of public scrutiny and accountability. Can they have ideology? Can they leave ideology aside? Is politics? In politics, you concentrate on practical policies rather than that affect people's daily lives, economic development, education, health, housing, employment, defense, and security. They have to decide that they want what they want to be: democratic or chauvinistic, pragmatic or Machiavellian, entrepreneurial or opportunist. Can the new elite attract others and work with them? Can they free themselves from this duality of the with us or against us mentality? Can they form coalitions and alliances and work as partners with others? Can they be non-partisan and give precedence to merit rather than loyalty? Without being pedantic, the terms Muslim and Islamic can only mean the same thing. Islam is what we are born into. It is what is inculcated in our souls, our genes, and our being from the first day we come to this world. To us Muslims, Islam is above and supersedes all the laws, principles, values, and any constitutions that we might subsequently adopt or make for ourselves. The Libyan society is a Muslim and therefore Islamic. The Islamic State is where the nationality of every citizen, no matter how good a Muslim or he or she might be, is recognized and respected, where Muslims live full and learn full Islamic life and learn how to improve it, where they interact with and learn from other cultures and civilizations. It is where they can exchange ideas and answers, and where Muslims live as part of the whole human society. The identity of the Libyan people is Islamic and Arab. Their language, religion, traditions, norms, and daily way of life signify distinctive and fundamental affiliation to a civilization and history that are greater than the country's borders and demography. Just to finish quickly then, the most important thing that should take priority are security, economic development, and political stability. And that is what the Islamists have to guarantee to the people if they want to serve them. Only in this way shall we make Libya a stable and democratic force for the good in the region. Those of us who opposed the old regime, pariah regime since the early 70s and fought for freedom, democracy, and justice considered the revolution against the regime had now been done. The real revolution in Libya starts now. We must work for the development of Libya, its reintegration and incorporation into the world, the Mediterranean, in Africa, in Europe, and in the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving us the case study of Libya. Indeed, it is very complex and evolving, and we'll all be watching to see how that develops. I would now like to invite Ahmed Abdurrabbo to discuss his perspectives on Islamism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like, of course, to thank AMIC for inviting me, even though it was a very short notice invite, but I decided to participate simply because I have never been to Africa. Okay, I'm Egyptian, but away from Egypt, I've never been to any African country. And also because I think it is a time to speak out our experiences in the Arab world with our African neighbors, friends, brothers and sisters, because usually I was invited to conferences about Arab uprisings in London, Washington, D.C., Qatar, Doha, or Cairo, or Istanbul, but never in Africa. So thank you very much. And like my mission today is a bit difficult because I'm here to answer big questions, grand questions. I have 3 very big questions to answer. The first question is, usually everybody, when we discuss political Islam and democracy, Islam and uprisings, etc., we ask a very important question. Will Islamists sustain democracy? But I think there is a prerequisite question. The question that's usually and often forgotten is, are Islamists ready to govern? I mean, this is, I think, a very important question we should highlight before answering the second question. And then the third and last question I'll try to answer, or at least I'll try to put some insights to answer, is what is the future waiting for Islamists being in power after the Arab uprisings or revolutions or whatever you call it? First of all, let's see how was the situation in the Arab and Islamic world just before January 2011, when uprisings started in Tunisia. That was in December 2010, and then January 2011, and in Egypt, followed by Libya, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, etc. First of all, we had almost like 60 what we may call Islamic countries. 32 out of them, more than 50% out of them, had over 85% of Muslims. Only 9 with from 66% to 85%, and then 19 others like with 50% of Muslims or with what we call it sizable minorities. I mean, they still playing a very important role in politics. However, with very few exceptions, I would say maybe Turkey and somehow Malaysia, we had no democratic Islamic country. I mean, okay, Iraq was democratic before 2011, but again, the Iraqi democracy is under question. I mean, I myself call it a puppet democracy. Afghanistan, okay, to some extent, but again, it's a puppet democracy. And we had also, most of the regimes were simply secularist and dictatorships. Okay, a country like Saudi Arabia may claim that they are an Islamic country, but again, it's a dictatorship. I mean, as a Muslim, I myself believe that this is not the right Islam. A country like Sudan, they claimed before 2011 that they are an Islamic country, but again, it's a failure country. I mean, they ended up having 2 different nations, etc. I mean, in most of cases, I would say we had secular and dictatorship countries with very few exceptions. And even, by the way, even in Turkey, after the revolution, when Mr. Erdogan came to Cairo, he shocked most of Islamists in Egypt when he said, yes, I'm an Islamist in a sense, but we have a secular regime. And most of Egyptians and most of Islamists in Egypt didn't accept that, and they were shocked. How come you're a secular? So I would say that why Egyptians, Tunisians, most of Arabs and Muslims joined Arab revolutions? Is it out of democracy? I mean, do they really needed, or did they really need democracy? Did they really want to fight dictatorships? Or out of anti-secular trends, they want to fight secularism and they want to produce and create their Islamic state, or out of economic hardships? Okay, yesterday, as our Israeli colleague was highlighting, like most with except to Gulf countries, we are under the poverty line. I mean, $400 per month and even less. So I would say, in my own opinion, of course it varies from a country to another, but I would say that one of the many very big reasons for why Egyptians, Tunisians revolted was the economic situation, especially in Egypt. It's true that we wanted to fight dictatorships. It's true that we want to stand against former President Mubarak when he wanted to inherit the power to his son. It's true that many Egyptians also have had and still have the dream of building an Islamic nation or Islamic state, but it's true also that the economic motivations were there. I mean, people were really frustrated out of their economic hardships they face. So my very first conclusion here, my very first point here is, I think some Arabs, especially in Egypt, as far as Egypt is concerned, are ready to sacrifice democracy for the sake of economic stabilities. As long as they secure some economic stabilities, they are ready to sacrifice democracy. Of course, they will not sacrifice democracy for the sake of another dictatorship. It will never happen. But for some hybrid regimes, they are ready for that. This is my first point. The second point is, Arabs and Muslims in Islamic countries and Arab countries are ready to sacrifice Islamists themselves if they don't have an economic stabilities. And look to what happened in Egypt. In January 2012, our Egyptian lower house, that's the parliament, Islamists had 72% of seats, with Muslim Brotherhoods almost 45%. 5 months later, in presidential elections, Muslim Brotherhoods lost 30 to 35% of votes. That's simply because most of Egyptians are swings. I mean, they swing very easily between extreme right and extreme left. So I would say one reason behind that is many people expected, they have over expectations of their economic situations, and in 5 months they didn't really realize that there is any improvement among other factors. So they decided to punish Islamists being in power. And nobody knows what will happen in the next stage. I mean, who knows what will happen in the coming parliamentary election in Egypt, for example, after 3 or 4 months. Now, back to my first question. Based on such kind of facts, or at least what I claim facts, will or are Islamists ready to govern? I would say one big problem here, most of Islamists, yes, of course, as Mr. Waddah highlighted very, very clearly, that of course they have engaged in politics in a way or another, but most of them engaged in politics as movements or groups, not as political parties and political institutions, and not as part of the game. I mean, okay, again, back to the Egyptian case, we had, for example, jihadists, and jihadists, simply Jama'ah Islamiyah and so on, were oppressed by the Mubarak regime and even by Sadat and Nasser regimes, and they decided not to play politics, but to fight against politics physically. They had their own weapons, they pumped it here and there. Simply, they thought that this is the way to resist the political dictatorships at that time. We had Salafists, and Salafists were totally isolated. I mean, Salafists in Egypt, especially in Egypt, maybe it differs from, for example, from Egyptian case to Jordanian case to Yemeni case, but in Egypt, Salafists were totally isolated from politics. And we have to realize that when uprisings started in Egypt, Salafists, or some of them, at least the big scholars of them, stood explicitly against the revolutions. Not because they shared same values of the old regimes, but revolution is not one of the techniques or tools to change the regimes they have. Third, we have Muslim brotherhoods. Okay, this is now different because Muslim brotherhoods, of course, they have been engaged in politics, but again, they were illegalized. Maybe later on in 2005, the Egyptian regime under Mubarak was kind of more tolerant with them. He tried to absorb them, so they got in 2005 elections, for example, they got 20% of seats almost. And by the way, one of the members of the parliament at that time was President Morsi, the current president of Egypt. He was one of the members of that time. But again, Muslim brotherhoods played politics with Mubarak regime as one, opposition to, not as a political party, not as a political institution, but as illegal underground Muslim brotherhoods group. As you know, those who know Arabic, we used to call them, or our media used to call them al-Jama'ah al-Mahzura. Al-Mahzura means a forbidden group or something like that. So I claim that all of a sudden, they didn't even transform or move from the opposition side, but from the underground politics to be rulers. They are now settlers of the game. They set the rules of the game. For my understanding, this even was a shock for them. And during that time, I realized that many of them was confused. What should be our next step? Is it to take revenge of our old regimes who suppressed us, prisoned us, or whether to build a democracy? Okay, if we build a democracy, what kind of democracy? How will we behave, react to civil society organizations, to public opinion? How to move forward with what's called transitional justice, and so on. And I would say, generally speaking, that most of them have a very big problem with the notion of the nation state itself. And most of them have a problem with the term of democracy. I mean, they are not dictatorships. They are ready to be democratic, but not in a very abstracted Western norm. So my conclusion at this point is that I think that Muslim brotherhoods in Egypt and Islamists generally in the Arab world are not ready yet to govern. They need time. I mean, like any other political organization. They need time to learn. But to what extent the public will be tolerant, will be patient, waiting them to learn and then to govern? Actually, again, back to my argument, the public is really looking for economic stability. And they are pressing for economic stability. And they will not be patient for years to come to sacrifice their economic stability waiting for Islamists to learn. So unless Islamists learn fast, I think it will be a very big problem in Egypt and in some other countries. The second question, what about Islamists and democracy? Will Islamists sustain democracy? Yes or no? Okay, as I just highlighted, we have a problem that many Islamists have a problem with the term of democracy itself. For them, democracy is not only fair elections, is not only multi-party system, is not only a peaceful handover of power, but it's also a package of foreign interventions. That is the case of Iraq, for example, a package of secularism, civility, etc. And I met many many Islamists, so to speak, and I found that they never differentiate between the civil nature of the state and the secular nature of the state. And to my understanding, there is a big difference between both. I mean, there might be a secular state, but this state could be a military state. There might be a secular state, but this state could be a dictatorship. But it's different with civility. I mean, democracy comes as a package of civility, civil nature of the state, of pluralism, I think Islamists have many problems with such kind of notions. Now they try to produce a different term called shura. Actually, this is not a new term, of course, as those who study Islamic political Islam, or so they know very well that we have what's so-called shura, and shura is to my understanding, was a very pioneering way of democracy at that time. I mean, that was like 14 or 15 centuries ago. But the problem is how to produce, I would say, applicable shura system where you detach yourself from the very abstracted Western norm of democracy. Here is the problem. I claim that so far, maybe in coming years, they will develop a practical, and applicable norm, but so far they don't have an alternative to democracy. So they are fine with democracy as long as they are in power. What happens if, for example, Egyptians or Tunisians or whoever decided to vote in a different direction, for example, for secularists, for socialists, etc.? I would say we have some indicators that Islamists will be fine. I mean, okay, in our Libyan case, when the public didn't vote for Islamists, they were fine. I mean, they didn't, for example, coup d'etat, they didn't upheave the situation. They were fine, they accepted. In Egypt, when all of a sudden the Supreme Court took a very, in my own opinion, a very politicized decision to dissolve the parliament, which is mostly 72% of Islamists, they accepted the situation. Of course, there was some noise here and there, but finally, all of a sudden, there has not been any violence. So I would say there are some indicators. It's not true to 100% say if democracy kicks off Islamists, they will just upheave or hijack the situation. But I would say there are some concerns that most of them believe that democracy as a tool, as is again abstracted Western norm, is not the right way to move forward. Without pushing or introducing an alternative term, I think they will be in trouble. Finally, I have the question is, what is the future of Islam? Before answering this question, and because I have only 5 minutes, I would say that Islamists nowadays have so many problems and have so many constraints and have so many challenges they have to answer as soon as possible. Number one, they have to understand that now they are governors. Okay, back to the case of Muslim brotherhoods. In Egypt, Muslim brotherhoods now are legalized. They have the Freedom and Justice Party. This party took 45% of seats in the last parliamentary election. The incumbent president of Egypt, President Morsi, he's the guy he was the chairman of Freedom and Justice Party, but Muslim Brotherhood till the moment are reluctant to legalize their own institutions. So now, in order to understand the situation in Egypt, you have Freedom and Justice Party as a political arm of Ikhwan Muslimin, of Muslim Brotherhoods. They want to keep the Muslim Brotherhoods detached from the political sphere. They don't want to legalize, they are not NGOs, so nobody knows exactly what is now Muslim Brotherhoods. Okay, we have the Freedom and Justice Party, that's fine, but what is Muslim Brotherhood? This is a very big question. So they have to understand they are governors, they have to legalize their situation, in my point of view. Number two, they have to take decisive decision how they will react to the nation state with the citizenship as the core membership of the society. I mean, I would claim that not only Muslim Brotherhoods, but in most of Islam's case, they have a problem with the nation state as a sovereign state. Thank you. They believe in, for example, ultra-national Islamic Ummah or Islamic State or Khilafah state. I'm fine with that as long as they introduce a practical way to implement such kind of state. But they don't have any, in my point of view, applicable Islamic state, and at the same time, they don't really respect the nation state because they believe that the nation state is out of some conspiracy theories here and there, so they are really in a big dilemma at the moment. Number three, they have to diversify their position on the continuum of right and left. I mean, it's very confusing. That's funny. Yesterday, when when Professor Shane was explaining about, I think he said he's leftist, and then while he's going to talk, I was like, oh my God, like where is my left and right? And I thought that, okay, maybe in Israel, a country with very high per capita income, the definition of right and left is totally different from under the poverty line guys like me. This is the problem of Islamists now in Egypt. Most of them claim they are either leftist or center-left in terms of economic programs. So, for example, they come and promise for social justice, social welfare programs, minimum wage, etc. But when it comes to the practice, when it comes to their ideologies, they are, I would say, exactly like Margaret Thatcher or Reagan back in 1980s. They are neo-conservative, neoliberals in terms of, the problem is not to be neoliberal, the problem is to have this contradictory between what you promise people and then their expectations is very high. Back to my argument, it is the economic stability that will determine the future of Islamists in some sense. And at the same time, all Islamists, Salafists, Jihadists, and Muslim Brotherhoods are all very extreme right in terms of practical problems. Finally, they have the problem of foreign policies. Just one very simple note. What happened in Egypt over the last months, the terrorist attacks on Sinai, and now President Morsi, I think he was confused in somehow. Why? At the time, he don't want to change he want to keep the peace treaty with Israel intact, simply because he has so many files to finish inside Egypt. But in a sense, people are looking to Islamists as those who will fight, I wouldn't say fight, but I mean, okay, and somehow oppose Israel, change the what's called Camp David Accord, what Morsi should do at this moment. So far, he's very progressive. He just pushed tanks, helicopters, soldiers to Sinai. That is forbidden according to the peace accords and the appendix of the peace treaty with Israel. But to what extent will he be able to sustain such kind of policies? To what extent, especially that he's now lobbied by the Americans, of course. And now he signed this IMF loan, which I'm sure has conditionalities. He denies, but I'm sure have some political conditionalities. I think this is the last challenge Islamists will face, and they have to answer such kind of questions in order to keep and sustain in power. Thank you very much, and sorry for my extension.
Thank you, Ahmed. Just a question for you to park till later on the economic issues that you raised. You talked about the per capita income of some countries that are wealthier than others. Would those countries keep their populations complacent and non-questioning through economic development? Case in point could be Qatar, for instance. Are people just satisfied to accept whatever governments they have? That's one that I'd like to park for later. I would now like to introduce Mr. Mohsen Saleh, who's going to speak to us on the Palestinian perspective. Most of you expected him to speak yesterday, but I think he felt more comfortable on our session this morning. Thank you, Mr. Mohsen.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Afro-Middle East Centre for organizing this important conference. Also, so happy to be here in South Africa for the first time. Talking about the impact of the Arab uprisings on the Palestinian issue, we may talk on 5 or 6 major points. I hope I can cover them. But generally speaking, what happened within the last 16 or 18 months is one of the major events in modern and contemporary Arab history. It is a turning point, in fact. But, however, still this change is in progress, and this still being, I mean, the countries and the region is still being reshaped and restructured. So it is very difficult to predict everything or to have an exact direction for the events within the coming few years. However, putting the Palestinian issue in mind, we may see three major potential circles of changes which may affect the Palestinian issue. Number one is the Arab citizen or the human being, what we call it al-insan al-jadid, the emergence of this insan or human being. Number two is the political systems, changing or new political systems. And number three is the strategic space around the occupied Palestine. So if we are talking about the Arab citizens or the human being, we are now seeing the emergence of new Arab people who broke the barrier of fears, who challenged their dictatorship and corrupted regimes, who are willing to sacrifice their lives for their freedom and dignity, and who are now forming their own political systems, and they have their own national agenda, mainly youth, who are now changing the history of the area. For the political systems, as you know, we are seeing the emergence of several new political systems, and maybe we may see also in the near future some others in the way for their change. Same to the, if this happened, then the strategic space around the Israeli regime and occupied Palestine will start to change. For the last 60 years, Israel was dependent to some extent in its survival, not only on its strength, but to be among or within a region which is weak, disunited, and backward, lagging behind. This gave the Israelis an opportunity to have a good power to maintain themselves in the region. And with the emergence of the new political system, the new Arab citizen, the human being, this strategic space around Israel could start to be changed. If this uprisings went in the right direction, in their positive manner, then what we may see is that a new environment which could be more supportive to resistance, more supportive to the Palestinian issue. Excuse me. Most of the people or the nations or the people of the countries in the Arab world were feeling that the insulting defeats were caused because of the Arab dictatorship regimes and the corrupted regimes. And they feel that with such a change, the whole formula with, the conflict with the Israelis may also have a potential to change, because this could give a good potential for changing the balance of power. It is the first time for the last 60 years in which we have these three changes among the human, the political system, and the strategic space. Thank you. When we have revolutions in the 1950s, these revolutions changed the political system, but in fact, they humiliated the human being. they disregarded him, they suppressed him, and instead of freeing the people, they enslaved them by the intelligence system, by the mukhabarat, and so on. So what was needed, in fact, is to free the people before going in a process of freeing the land. So the most important thing here is that with such uprisings, the freedom of the people is the first step to go ahead for liberating the land. This is my first point. My second point is with regard to the scenarios in the region. Is it a flowery one? Not necessarily. We may face 4 scenarios in the region in which every scenario may affect the Palestinian issue in one way or another. So we don't have an exact line of events or predictions for the Palestinian issue. It depends on possibilities. One of the scenarios is the local change and the reform within the Arab countries. It means that change will be only concentrated to be a local one, and it will have a kind of partial success of the uprisings. So people will be just involved in their internal politics, and they will not be very much involved with the general issues of the Ummah or of the Arab world, including the Palestinian issue. Number 2, this is another scenario. The second scenario is change towards an Arab Islamic awakening project. So if the uprisings were succeeded in making root change in the Arab region, and they will not only developing their own countries from the economic, social, or educational point of view, but also they will be going ahead with projects of unity, cooperation among themselves, and in this case, they will find themselves with the challenge of the Zionist project because it is in the heart of the Arab world and in the heart of the Muslim Ummah. So sooner or later, they will be facing such a challenge. Developing themselves in the right manner and strengthening their power may change the whole balance of power in the region, and this may trigger a change of the whole formula of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Number 3, the failure of the Arab uprisings in achieving their objectives and the return of the old regimes, and this would be reproduced. The old regimes may reproduce themselves in different phases. This could be a third scenario. A fourth scenario is the relapse towards chaos and ethnic division, where the uprisings fail in achieving their objectives and forces opposing them succeeded in fueling sectarian and ethnic divisions. So this is the black or the worst scenario could be happening. So the forces against the uprisings may make use or abuse the transitional periods in spreading disorder in the area and spreading ethnic and sectarian problems within the region. We have seen some writings by several Western writers and also Israeli writers. Alof Ben last year in 25th March 2011 in Haaretz wrote that by these uprisings, this may give Israel a hope of more division of the region based on ethnic and sectarian vision or basis. So there is another danger that uprisings cannot maintain themselves and achieve their goals, and this may go by such a support of the Israelis or Americans for dividing the region more and more. So with such a scenario, I mean, this could be a danger, and this danger may be facing now Syria or some other countries. However, in my opinion, the first and the second scenario are still prevalent, are still in the, hopefully in the right direction, and people, by their good understanding, cooperation, and the national unity can maintain a good understanding of their challenges and also can deal with their challenges. However, I think these challenges in the area, when we study them, we will find that we are seeing a kind of a conflict of wills, not only between the people or the regimes. It is a kind of triangle conflict. We have the people, the nations who are revolting, who wanted the change, number one. We have the old regime, the dictatorship and the corrupted system, number two. And number three, we have the regional and the international powers who wanted to have their own version of the Middle East and also who want to apply their own interests. So, as much as we can help the people and the nations, thank you, and give them the right support, as we can hopefully get the right outcome, inshallah. Going quickly for some other points. I have only 5 minutes. Still the 4, okay. As my colleague Waddah mentioned in his keynote address and a few minutes ago, we are ahead of a new Middle East, a new Arab and Muslim world. This area would be stronger and more independent. How, in general, we have 3 big powers in the Middle East. We have Iran, Turkey, and we have the emerging power of Egypt if things went in the right direction in Egypt. In general, those who are interested to have Middle East under their control or their influence, the Western powers, try to promote differences among them, whether sectarian or ethnic and so on, concentrating on the conflicts between them and so on, the fragmentation of the region. However, if these 3 big countries deal with the changes in the Middle East in the right way, then they have many things which are common among themselves, which can have a general basis, a common basis of understanding. Their religion, their culture, their history, in which they can have big bases of cooperation. Also, they have also their interest of preventing the foreign intervention in their area. Besides, also, the Palestinian issue is a unifying factor for them. So, if they manage to have such a program, then at least we will find that Palestine will be a major issue in which could be an area of cooperation among them. I have some things to say about Syria and other countries, but maybe in the discussion. But I will talk quickly about the implications of the possible implications in the of the uprisings, in the short run and in the long run, in the Arab world. Quickly, for the short run, we are expecting, if things went positively, that we may have an easing of the Gaza siege. Also, we may have further decline in the application of the Camp David agreement between Israel and Egypt, and the deterioration of the process of normalization with Israel. Also, we may have a different approach to the Palestinian reconciliation files, which allow greater understanding of the Palestinian opposition resistance movement. Also, we may have also a hardening of the Palestinian and Arab stance towards peaceful settlement. Also, we may have also reducing or ending the American and Israeli influence on the Arab decision-making. For the long run, the flourishing of the Arab and Islamic Awakening project, which might lead to huge political, economic, and social, and even military transformation in the region, thus leading to the disruption of the current balance of power and creation of determined, powerful human being or human willing to lead the change. This will eventually have its impact to the future of the Zionist project in the region. Secondly, the formation of the popular and official strategic space, which will be more supportive to the resistance and more aggressive towards Israel. And number three, the activation of the Arab and Muslim dimensions of the Palestinian cause. However, we have on the Palestinian side, there could be a good horizon for the rearrangement of the Palestinian internal house, including the PLO and the PA. Also, we may have the emergence of young Palestinian generation seeking the end of the state of division among Palestinians. Also, we may have a good activation of the Palestinian diaspora role in the Palestinian cause. On the other side, we may have some negative implications, at least in the short run. The Israelis may speed up the Judaization process in establishing facts on the ground, especially in Jerusalem. Also, the Israelis may increase the militarization and their security measures. Also, they may activate their security intelligence work in the region. I'll finish just 2 sentences. Also, they may exploit, the Israelis, the state of turmoil and transformation conditions to achieve fragmentation on religious and ethnic levels. In the same time, as we are seeing, the Hamas and the resistance movement, their work was almost confused in Syria. And of course, I don't have time to talk about the position of Hamas and resistance movement with what's happening in Syria, just to say that they supported the right of the people for democratic change, and that's why they did not go ahead with any kind of staying in Syria, because they don't want to give a cover to whatever military actions of the Syrian regime against their own people. I'm sorry for this health problem which caused such trouble. Thank you very much.